We have a mass casualty event incoming. Clear the hallway now. Get this crash cart to Trauma Bay 2 immediately.
The night the dog collapsed at her feet and would not move, no matter how many doctors shouted, no matter how many hands tried to pull him away, the entire emergency room finally understood something they had mocked for 6 months. Grace Whitfield was not weak. She was not broken. She was the only person in that hospital the dog trusted with his life, and within hours she would prove she deserved that trust with her own. If you believe in second chances, in quiet people who carry more strength than anyone realizes, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little hope tonight, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Now let's begin. Grace Whitfield had worked the night shift at Cedarbrook Regional Hospital in Asheville, North Carolina, for almost a year, and in that time she had learned to make herself small. She spoke only when spoken to. She kept her eyes down in the break room. She ate her sandwiches alone at 3 a.m., sitting on an overturned supply crate near the loading dock because the cafeteria felt too loud, too bright, too full of people who already had their opinions of her settled. The nurses called her the ghost. The residents joked that you could walk right past her and never know she was there. Dr. Marcus Whitlow, the trauma attending everyone respected and feared in equal measure, had once said in front of a full nurses' station that Grace was sweet, but she doesn't have what it takes for real medicine. Nobody defended her. Nobody ever had. What none of them knew was that Grace had once had what it takes, in the truest sense anyone could measure it. Before Cedarbrook, before the scrubs and the trauma bay and the fluorescent hallways, Grace had been a combat medic. 3 tours. 2 Purple Hearts she never mentioned. A best friend named Corporal Isaiah Boone who bled out in her arms in a country most of her coworkers couldn't find on a map, while she pressed both hands into a wound that was never going to close in time no matter what she did. She came home from that war with steady hands and a heart that had learned to close its doors quietly, one room at a time, so that nothing could get back in and hurt her the way that loss had. She took the quietest job she could find. She wanted invisibility. She wanted peace. She got neither. The dog arrived on a Tuesday in October, carried through the ambulance bay doors on a gurney meant for a human being, his handler unconscious beside him after a car accident on Interstate 40. His name was Ranger, a 7-year-old Belgian Malinois who had served 2 deployments with the Army before retiring into service with a local police K-9 unit, and he had a shattered hind leg and a gash along his ribs that needed 40 stitches. Most of the staff didn't know what to do with him. Veterinary care wasn't exactly hospital protocol, and the on-call vet was 40 minutes out. Ranger thrashed and snapped at everyone who came near, panicked and in agony, until Grace stepped through the crowd of hesitating staff, knelt down at his level, and spoke to him in a low, even voice that nobody in that hospital had ever heard her use before. She didn't flinch when he growled. She didn't pull back when his teeth grazed her sleeve. She simply kept talking, kept her hands slow and open, until the animal's frantic breathing began to slow to match her own. It took her 11 minutes to calm him enough to splint the leg herself, using techniques she'd learned patching up working dogs overseas, techniques none of the ER staff had ever seen a civilian nurse perform. Dr. Whitlow watched from the doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing, though something in his expression had shifted from irritation to a confusion he wasn't ready to name. When Ranger's handler, a young Asheville police officer named Officer Caleb Judson, woke up 2 days later with a concussion and a fractured wrist, the first thing he asked about was his partner. And the first thing the nurses told him, half laughing, was that the dog wouldn't let anyone near him except the quiet one from the night shift. Caleb, still groggy, only nodded and said that made sense, because Ranger didn't trust easily, and if he'd chosen her, She must be someone worth trusting. That should have been the end of it, a strange, sweet moment, filed away as hospital gossip and forgotten within a week. But Ranger didn't leave. His handler was moved to a recovery floor, unable yet to care for a working dog with a shattered leg, and the department had nowhere immediate to place him. So somebody, half as a joke, suggested Grace keep an eye on him during her shifts until arrangements were made. She agreed without hesitation, and something extraordinary began to happen. Ranger refused to be more than 10 feet from her. He was kept in a supply room near the nurse's station, and yet every single night, security cameras caught him nosing open the door, dragging his splinted leg down the hallway, and lying down directly outside whatever room Grace was working in. He would not eat unless she brought the bowl herself. He would not sleep unless he could see her scrubs, that particular shade of hospital blue, somewhere in his line of sight. The staff who had laughed at her for a year began to notice, in the way people notice things they don't want to admit means something. Then came the night that changed everything. It was just past 2 a.m. when a multi-car pile-up on the interstate sent 6 critical patients through the ambulance bay doors at once, overwhelming a night shift already stretched thin. Grace was moving between 2 gurneys, calling out vitals with a calm precision that made the younger nurses stop and stare, when Ranger, still confined to the supply room, began to bark, not the occasional bark he'd given before, but a frantic, relentless, alarm bell kind of barking that carried through the entire wing. Nobody had time to deal with the dog. Nobody except Grace, who, in the middle of stabilizing a patient, felt something cold settle in her stomach. A feeling she recognized from years of trusting instincts that had kept her alive in far worse places than this. She asked another nurse to take over, walked to the supply room, and found Ranger clawing at the door with an intensity that made no sense for an animal recovering from major surgery. She let him out. He didn't run to her. He ran past her, straight toward the trauma bay where the 6th patient, a woman pulled unconscious from the wreck, had just been wheeled in, and where, unnoticed by the exhausted team focused on more visibly critical patients, that woman's oxygen saturation was silently crashing. Ranger planted himself beside her gurney and would not stop barking until Grace reached her side and saw what no monitor had yet flagged, a subtle blue tinge creeping into the woman's lips, an airway beginning to close from swelling nobody had caught in the chaos. Grace's training took over instantly. She called for a crash cart, performed an emergency intervention to secure the airway, and in the span of 90 seconds did the work that saved that woman's life, work that a dog with no medical training somehow sensed before an entire team of doctors did. The room went silent afterward in a way that hospitals rarely allow themselves. Dr. Whitlow stood in the doorway again. But this time there was no crossed-armed skepticism on his face, only something closer to shame. He had spent a year dismissing a woman who, it turned out, had steadier hands and sharper instincts than most people he'd trained beside. Word spread through the hospital by morning, not as gossip this time but as something closer to reverence. The quiet night nurse who talked to a ward dog like an old friend. The ward dog who had somehow known, in some way none of them could explain, that this woman's calm exterior held the kind of competence that gets forged only in places where mistakes cost lives. Officer Caleb Judson, once he was well enough, asked to speak with Grace privately, and she finally told him, haltingly, in fragments, the way people speak about the things that hurt the most, about her 3 tours, about Isaiah Boone, about the war she'd carried home in silence because she'd believed nobody wanted to hear it, and because some nights she still felt the phantom weight of his blood on her hands. Caleb listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he told her something she needed to hear far more than she'd realized, that Ranger didn't choose people randomly. Working dogs are trained to sense competence and controlled calm under pressure, the exact qualities that panic strips away from most people. Ranger hadn't stayed by her side out of confusion or coincidence. He had recognized, faster than any human in that building, that Grace Whitfield was one of the steadiest, most capable people in the room, and he simply refused to let the world keep overlooking her. In the weeks that followed, everything shifted. Dr. Whitlow personally recommended her for a lead position on the trauma team, an apology delivered not in words but in respect finally given. The nurses who once called her the Ghost started asking her to train alongside them, hungry to learn the techniques she'd never been given the chance to share. And Ranger, once his leg healed enough to return to active duty, was given a rare allowance by the department. He would split his working hours between police service and scheduled visits to Cedarbrook, an arrangement nobody could remember approving before, but nobody wanted to deny after what he'd done. Grace began eating her sandwiches in the break room again, no longer alone, Ranger's head resting heavy and warm across her feet under the table. If this story moved something in you tonight, if it reminded you that quiet people often carry the deepest strength, and that sometimes it takes someone, or something, with nothing to gain to finally see us clearly, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And before we go, I want you to do one more thing for me. Comment the word Ranger below if you believe loyalty like his is real, and that the right soul, on 4 legs or 2, can find us exactly when we need it most. Grace Whitfield never went looking for recognition. She never asked to be seen. But sometimes the truest kind of rescue isn't the one we perform, it's the one that finds us first, refusing, against all odds, to leave our side.